On November 9, 1989, an hour-long routine press conference triggered the collapse of the Iron Curtain, the heavily fortified border dividing communist Eastern Europe from the democratic West. At a table facing the cameras sat Günter Schabowski, a high-ranking East German official acting as the party's spokesman. He was under immense pressure to calm a growing national crisis, and he was about to make a massive mistake. Toward the end of the briefing, a reporter asked when a newly drafted travel law would take effect. Schabowski shuffled his papers, hesitated, and stammered out that it would happen immediately, without delay. Within minutes, that sentence reached news desks across the West and was broadcast back into the homes of the people the wall was meant to contain. To understand how a slip of the tongue could cause such destruction, we have to look back to January of that same year. Erich Honecker, the leader of East Germany, confidently boasted that the Berlin Wall would stand for another 50, even 100 years. But the system's structural integrity was already failing. By the summer, tens of thousands of East German citizens began exploiting recently opened borders in neighboring Hungary and Austria, physically cutting through fences to escape to the west. Inside the country, the pressure compounded. Hundreds of thousands of citizens organized peaceful, candlelit protests in cities like Leipzig. They filled the streets night after night, holding banners and demanding democratic reforms. The East German state was collapsing under the weight of its own fleeing and protesting populace. To survive, the nearly bankrupt regime desperately needed to release the pressure. In early November, the Politburo, the ruling executive committee of the Communist Party, drafted a travel regulation known as VVS B2 937/89. Was a highly restrictive, temporary measure meant to appease the public while keeping the state firmly in control of who could leave. Schabowski was handed a note summarizing this draft right before his press conference. Because he had not been in the planning meetings, he missed the crucial details stating that the law required a phased implementation and a strict visa application process. When he misspoke and said the borders were open immediately, West German television networks seized on the quote. By 8 p.m., their news anchors were broadcasting that the gates in the wall stood open wide. Because most East Germans watched Western television broadcasts, the state's restrictive legal intent vanished. A careless phrase was instantly overwritten by the media's declaration of absolute freedom. Within minutes of the broadcast, tens of thousands of East Germans left their homes in the middle of the night. They swarmed the 6 Berlin checkpoints, demanding to be let through. At Bornholmer Strasse, a major border crossing between East and West Berlin, Commander Harold Jäger and his guards found themselves vastly outnumbered by an angry, surging crowd. Jäger frantically called his superiors for instructions, but no one in the chain of command would take personal responsibility. The leadership refused to issue a shoot-to-kill order, leaving the paralyzed guards entirely without a protocol. Finally, at 10:45 p.m., Jäger yielded to the crushing pressure. Acting unilaterally, he ordered his men to open the gates, allowing the masses to flood through unchecked. A heavily fortified military border, guarded by machine guns and landmines, was defeated by a combination of a bureaucratic typo and the peaceful, overwhelming non-compliance of a massive crowd. As Berliners celebrated, the accidental collapse of the wall sent shockwaves of panic through European capitals. Margaret Thatcher, the British Prime Minister, actively opposed German reunification. Privately, she warned that merging the two halves would destabilize the entire continent. François Mitterrand, the French president, shared these fears. He warned a reunified Germany could threaten Europe's security and unravel carefully balanced post-war borders. Western allies had spent decades rhetorically championing freedom in Berlin. Now that it had actually arrived, they were terrified of the resulting power vacuum and the potential economic dominance of a whole German state. West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl recognized the danger in this geopolitical vacuum. On November 28th, just weeks after the wall fell, he stepped in. He executed a swift countermove, delivering a surprise 10-point plan to the West German Federal Parliament. His goal was to seize total control of the narrative before the nervous allies could intervene. Kohl insisted that East Germany dismantle its rigid state-run economy in exchange for immediate, massive humanitarian aid. The plan moved past a loose cooperative agreement, aiming for total integration of the East into a single, reunified democratic federation. The Berlin Wall fell without military conquest or grand diplomatic treaties. Decades of grassroots pressure stretched a rigid system to its breaking point. When a flustered bureaucrat mismanaged his notes, he accidentally set a nation free.